So I know I frequently say this and it's like never actually the case, but this might wind up being one of my more controversial videos. So I like to think that I have a reputation for being very unsuperstitious, or to use kind of a less pejorative term, just very disinclined to attribute things to supernatural causes. And that's not just for demonic influences, but also for God and saints and angels. It's not that I disbelieve in any of these things. I just tend to think people are pretty evil on their own, or people are pretty good on their own. People can be either without, I guess, kind of direct intervention, and that the world is just a very strange place. And we can sometimes attribute specific divine intervention in a case that we just don't understand. So, my point is, I generally speaking don't attribute supernatural causes to a lot of things. That being said, there are a couple times in my life, and this was even when I was secular. I wasn't. There's times I've been deistic or even agnostic or non-religious entirely, where something triggers this just profound sense of evil. It's this oppressive, horrendous atmosphere in the room that just fills me with kind of this supernatural dread. And the first time I can remember experiencing it was I think 7 or 8 at the time, and I was watching the news with my grandfather, and it showed a pride parade, and it showed like people in like S&M gear who were like on dog collars getting whipped, and like dudes like having sex on floats, and them like dressing kids up and stuff like that. And I just felt this profound sense of evil just radiating off of it. And it deeply disturbed me. And even when I was very pro, I don't know, the term is kind of cringy now, pro LGBTQ rights or whatever, and I supported gay marriage, I really found that whole thing to be really disgusting. And that just kind of always stuck with me as one of the few times in my life where I actually have, I think, felt a supernatural presence. And there's not that many times. I guess some other times I can think of is when I first read about Kermit Gosnell's crimes. Now, if you don't know who Kermit Gosnell is, he's probably the most notorious serial killer in American history. He ran an abortion clinic, but it's much worse than just a normal abortion clinic. A large proportion of his were post-birth abortions. So he would basically, it was a viable baby. By viable, I mean like it could survive outside the womb, and he'd induce birth, and then he'd like cut it apart. And he kept like trophies of the babies. He'd like be eating fried chicken. There were cats that were like pissing and shitting everywhere. It literally sounded like hell, his office. Just how bad it was. And when I read about that, that's actually what made me pro-life, was just the demonic, just reading it, I just felt this demonic presence, and it just really disturbed me. And I often find that with a lot of people, because there's different like tiers of being pro-abortion. Like there's people who view it as kind of a necessary evil, and I disagree, but that doesn't really bother me as much. And then there's people who view it as like a sexual fetish or even like a sacrament. I've done videos about these people in the past. They tend to be like Episcopalian or some other liberal form of Christianity, and they'll go and they'll like bless abortion clinics, and they'll say like it was a profoundly spiritual experience, and like I felt closer to God. And like there's women who will deliberately get them and stuff. And in that, like, I feel this sense of just evil radiating off of that. So I'm just kind of giving some examples. So in the last month or two, I've just been feeling this immense demonic energy very frequently. Now, does this mean demons are actually involved, or is this just something that hurts me on a fundamental moral level and just deeply disturbs me, and this is kind of a psychological way of coping? I don't know, but we just have people who have gone insane. Society has gone insane. And I mean, there's like when Adam Smith heard about the American colonies revolting, somebody said to him, "This will be the ruin of the nation." And he said, "There's a great deal of ruin in a nation." That is, there's always a social crisis, there's always problems, there's always political issues, there's always poverty, there's always disease. Until the world ends, until Christ returns, this world is always going to be very flawed. But there's degrees of that. There's degrees of that, and it applies in different areas. So crime might be lower, but sexual degeneracy might be worse. Or the people might be pure and moral, but they're starving. So, like, you can have different types of evil and different types of good. So, in some cases, it's there's always ruin in the nation, but how bad it is and the degree to which, in the areas where it's in, kind of vary. But what I've been seeing is this canonization of George Floyd. So we had like a early last week. We had a diversity seminar we had to go to, and it started out with a moment of silence that went on for whatever it was, 8 minutes and 42 seconds. The amount of time that George Floyd was choked, and it felt like I was in a church. They're just like, you have to just pray for how great he is. And then they were like, when he was being choked, he said, like, "Sir, get off of me," because he faced his death with such grace. He was like a saint. He was like a Christian being fed to the lions. That's how great he was. He was dying for what he believed in. And they just, like, heaped on him, like, how he's this, like, great person. And you had people, like, hysterically crying about how much they loved George Floyd and how great a person he was. And to me, it's even if this was just some random dude, that would be kind of weird. Because I hate fake grief. I've always hated fake grief. Like, I hate whenever, like, I don't know, someone, like, gets, like, the the bus of peace guy, the incel guy who ran a bunch of people down in Toronto, and everyone was, like, crying and saying how much it affected them, and it obviously didn't, because they didn't know any of the people, and just horrible things happen. And whenever there's a tragedy, and just everybody outcompetes each other to see how upset they are. The only time I think I've ever really expressed grief over something was when ISIS was beheading Christians and blowing stuff up. I got pretty upset about that, but I've been pretty consistent about the plight of Middle Eastern Christians for well over a decade at this point. But anyways, my point is I hate public grief, and that's bad enough, but they're, like, canonizing him, and they're saying, like, George Floyd is looking down at us from heaven, and he's happy about, like, what we're doing, and stuff like that, and we have to do this in his name. And I'm like, this guy is a garbage human being. He participated in, I refuse to watch it, but from my understanding, an especially brutal hardcore porn movie. He was a drug dealer. Who knows? He might have gotten some kids addicted to meth. He was a drug addict himself. He tried to defraud a convenience store, and he committed at least, I think, a couple incidences of armed robbery. He threatened a pregnant woman with a gun. And maybe that gets them points because he was going to, like, give her an abortion. And that's some sort of fucking, sexual fetish to them. So they're taking, and I think that's part of it. I think part of what makes this so demonic is it's not like some, like, black kid, like some, I don't know, like some 8-year-old black kid who doesn't know what they're doing, and they have, like, a water gun, and it's like they point it at a cop accidentally and the cop shoots them because he's on edge. Like, I don't know, something like that, or something. But they pick, like, one of the worst human beings they can find. And there's, like, this other dude who, like, assaulted the cop, stole his taser, and tried to, like, attack him with it. And they pick these people and they canonize them. They deliberately pick, like, the worst people they can find. And I think that's part of it. It's part of the whole power play. And as I just hear them crying and praising this guy and basically worshiping him as if he were Christ himself, I felt this sense of just evil, of just profound disgust, just radiating off of the whole thing. And not just that, but there's something, and I'll have to do a separate video on it called Liberation Spirituality, where I think the left has figured out that like nobody cares about atheism other than white people. And by atheism, I mean like materialistic reductionism, because there's plenty of Asians who don't really have a conception of like a creator deity, but they're still superstitious, like they worship their ancestors, they think like demons or spirits exist. And they kind of realize that like no one other than white people cares about it. So what they've done is they've tried to add like this religious justification. So like in like the diversity meeting, they went on for about half an hour about how evil Christianity was and how it's spreading homophobia and racism to the third world. And then they immediately switched over and talked about how like progressive Christianity needs to be more incorporated into society, and how like ministers are working to prevent racism, and like how you have like George Floyd intervening on our behalf in heaven, or stuff like that. I mean, from the way he lived, he's probably in hell. I mean, we can't know for certain if anybody is in hell, but judging from his life and his death, there's a pretty good chance of that. It's quite possible that Stalin has a better chance of being in heaven than him. Mussolini almost certainly does, and he's like the D tier antichrist, I guess, of the left. So you have that, and that alone is really disturbing. You also have this massive number of people who are praising just wanton destruction, like just mindless destruction. Just like they look at a video of, we'll take maybe a boomer example of like some old black woman or some old black guy who scrimped and saved his entire life, who played by the rules, who opened a little store and was going to kind of spend his middle age and maybe his senior years somewhat successful. And you see these fucking thugs break in, break down his door, steal everything, burn it. And you see like these people celebrate that and say this is great. This is great that they're victimizing this guy, that they're stealing, that they're raping people, that they're killing people, and they're celebrating it. And they're not just celebrating it, but they like I said, there's this liberation spirituality. They're giving it like they're fulfilling God's purpose. God's purpose is to like break down someone's door and like steal stuff from them and like physically assault them because you're out of greed and resentment. Like, I get that on the whole this serves the greater political purpose, but individually these people are just opportunists. And as I said, it doesn't even bother me as much that they're breaking down doors and stealing stuff, because I get that. Like I get the, like, you're in a store, you see like the more expensive food, or you see like the expensive car, and I think it occurs to most people in their lives, I just wish I could grab that and just leave with it. It would be so easy. I think that's something that occurs to most people at some point, or I wish I could just get this and not have to pay for it. I don't think the idea of like praising and worshiping it and treating it like it's a sacrament, this just mindless destruction, is something that occurs to most people. And just as I hear them crying about how great it is, and as I hear them just make stuff up, like a Juneteenth or whatever the heck it is, and pretend like it's always been there, just the hatred of truth, the hatred of the natural law, the hatred of everything like good and decent. It just felt this immense demonic aura radiating off of them. And they also brought it like into intersectionality about like gays and how we have to get rid of the traditional family and stuff like that, and how kids have to be able to chop their dicks off. And like like I said, it is a religious experience. I think that's something you have to keep in mind, is it is a religion for these people. And that's why it doesn't really matter what facts you bring forward, what, like, because you can do FBI crime stats, you can show that blacks aren't disproportionately abused relative to their crime rate. It doesn't matter. You could have a videotape of every black crime and every white crime that shows incontrovertible proof that black people commit more crimes per capita, and it wouldn't matter. It also doesn't matter how much they get. Like I said, you could give each black person $10 million a year for the rest of their lives, and that doesn't matter. It is an article of religious faith. And it's just so lame. It's lame, and they're literally putting like their eternal soul and their salvation in the hands of like George Floyd and like a bunch of thugs who are looting and burning stuff. And like I said, they view like the kid chopping off his dick as a sacrament. They view traditional families getting destroyed as a sacrament, and they just spew like just such hatred and poison. Like that everybody in Africa was like gay before white people came, and like even though we have records that the Aztecs executed gays and executed people for adultery and had a pretty what Europeans would recognize as a traditional family structure, that didn't exist. And it's just, and as they just talk about this and they rant about this and they attack Jesus, they attack God, and then they simultaneously place their own God above the actual God. Something I always kind of think, and this is something I kind of always ask myself and ask other people, and maybe this is kind of the way I measure sincerity, is what does believing in God, because you believe in God or because you changed your religion, did that impact you in any way? Did you have to give anything up? And I don't mean anything like physically, I mean like spiritually. Did you have to accept some truths that you didn't want to accept? Did you have to change the way you looked at the world? Was there any difficulty you faced? And when I changed, I had to change my opinion on a lot of things, and it was very difficult, and it took a long time. But do you think any of these people who are saying like George Floyd is their saint, that like abortion is like some sort of like sacrament, do you think any of these people sacrificed anything for their faith? Because their faith just seems to be giving a spiritual dimension to things they already believed in, and that everybody they know is in like union with. And once again, there's just the pride aspect of it. There's the whole idea that like to show how good a person I am, I'm gonna celebrate just horrendous stuff. I'm gonna chop my kid's dick off. I'm gonna like let my store get destroyed and like my kids groomed and raped. And I'm gonna do all of this because I'm such a good person. Like it just, there's this demonic influence, and it's gonna get worse before it gets worse. It's just people have gotten complete. It's mass hysteria, and it's profoundly disturbing to me. So maybe this is going to be controversial. Maybe people are going to call me like crazy or schizophrenic or something. But I don't know. I just can't like take it anymore. It's, to me, I've kind of accepted there is probably some supernatural influence going on here. So, anyways, God bless. Maybe we'll just end with a short prayer. Glory be to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, as it was, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.